Hello, I'm Jean Crosby. I look after my husband Tom. The surname is spelt C-R-O-S-B-I-E. Straight out of the blue, like it hits everybody. Tom and I were your average married couple with grown-up children, led slightly independent lives. He was driving, the stress of his job got to him and he had a massive stroke. Our worlds changed at that moment and we lived with the consequences ever since. Well, when his stroke first happened, you just don't think any further than that day. Gradually you start thinking a little bit further ahead, but you never picture how your life is going to be. I had to give up full-time work. So basically overnight our income just stopped. We'd never been on benefits, we are now. It's a whole different system, a whole different world, and gradually you learn so much as you go along. I've learned a lot from other carers. Working with a stroke support group means I meet lots of people with different stories, but they've often got the same thread running through. My daughter in particular made an important choice in her life. The timing couldn't have been worse. The day her father came out of hospital, she chose to leave her partner. But it meant that she's made important life decisions, thinking of the future, saying, if I'm not happy with this person, would I look after him if he had a stroke tomorrow? So it has given them a different perspective. It's made them look at me a little more, kindly is a strange word to use, but my son sees more of it perhaps. He comes and stays because they live further away. And if you see Tom over a 24-hour period, you get a much better idea of what's involved in caring. You can see him for 2 hours and you wouldn't understand the late nights, the early mornings, the constant, the word I use is relentless. Caring is relentless. But somebody did say something important to me when I said my family don't understand, and I said they don't help as much as I'd like, and they said, do you ask? And I don't. I consider it that I don't want to be a burden on them. So if I ask for too much help, it's not helping them live their lives. It's a very difficult balance because I would like them to understand better, but I can't let them. I can't let them into the decisions I make and the caring that I do every day. The biggest one is lack of knowledge, I think. Knowledge is a very powerful tool. If I'd known more about how to care, what the impacts would be, if I'd learned from other people. I'd imagine myself caring for parents further down the line, but not in my 50s. It's as though we lost 20 years of our life overnight. We suddenly became the pensioners of the family because we live life at that pace now. And I've got the added thing that my parents are getting older and they're going to need care as well. So it affects the whole family, but it takes a long time to see the ripples play out through the family. You have to be quite self-centered at first, but gradually you get to see the effect that it has. I've thought a lot about this before today, and some of it is I choose to care. And I know that sounds silly because in the early days I did make a definite decision. We'd been married for a long time. We'd been married for nearly 30 years, I think, when the stroke happened. So I wasn't going to give up on my husband overnight, but I did make a conscious decision that I was going to care. And people were surprised that I had to make the decision. It was just expected of me. I did make the decision and I continue to. The thing I choose to do is to try and do the caring well. It's not just putting a meal in front of him, it's giving thought to what he'd like to cheer him up that day, to make his day a little better. And if I can make it a good day for him, it's a good day for me. I think I still feel the restrictions upon me, but if I choose every day to do that role, it seems a little easier. It has. I'm a lot more patient than I used to be, and still not as patient as I should be. Tom lives life at a much slower pace. Simply getting out of a chair takes 10 times longer than your average person. In that time, there are a million things rushing through my head that I could be doing while I'm waiting. And it's very difficult to slow down. Some of that drive is what keeps us going, but the main thing is the sense of humour that we've kept. The whole family don't treat Tom any differently. His memory is affected, his concentration's affected, and he can fall asleep faster than you can blink. But the family still treat him like Tom's just the same, and I think that's so important. We're lucky he doesn't have speech difficulties because he can join in, but if a family gathering gets too big, it gets difficult. And people don't see these little nuances that I'll pick up that he's getting tired. And sometimes people look at the carer and think you're being a little overprotective, because it's easy for them to see, why has she jumped up? He's only going to the toilet. But if you jump up at that point, you can help him get there quicker, make things easier, make sure he's less tired by the end of the day. And they don't understand that. They think you're jumping up a little too soon, that you should let him be more independent. But it's hard for someone outside the situation to see that, definitely. I don't think I would have appreciated it before. And I mix with other carers where we exchange tips, information, have a laugh and a cry. Sometimes two carers will get together and go, isn't it really awful? Not in those words. But sometimes just telling somebody else how awful it is and that they understand is enough. That's where it's difficult. The first time we were together 24 hours a day all of a sudden, and for any married couple, I don't think that's healthy. It was a case of, I did feel trapped, and gradually, as we got used to our roles, it was, I could allow myself a little time, but we were encouraged to take respite. And Tom went away for the weekend with a carer and a support group. And all of a sudden, I was on my own again, and I sat and thought, well, who am I now? My main purpose has left the room. I don't know what I'm supposed to do. And I found that really odd. I mean, I had plans. I zipped all over the country in that weekend to see people I hadn't seen in ages and things like that. But I felt very alone. So there is a kind of balance that, yes, you want time to yourself, but that time is by yourself. And that's quite hard because your brain is still on him. Even now, I'm thinking, has the taxi turned up to pick him up? Are they helping him out the car? Has he got his key in the door? That kind of thing. Half of your mind is always somewhere else. And that gets difficult sometimes because you don't concentrate on where your own feet are going. But it is quite hard to retain your own identity, because if you take Tom out of the equation, I'm kind of a little lost. So respite was good, and I'm glad we were encouraged, but since that we've taken respite breaks together, which you may think defeats the whole object of it, but actually it doesn't. So respite is brilliant, but it's hard as well. It took me time to settle back down after having a few days off. And I was more than a little resentful that I had to slip back into that role. So there's all sorts of things that still surprise us even now. And this is 6 years further on. He didn't really have any comprehension of how life had changed. When he had his stroke, it was so sudden. and he was in hospital and his recovery was very slow in the early first couple of months. I had to tell him his business had folded. He ran his own business and there was only him employed by it, so it didn't exist anymore. He had no concept of time passing, so he thought, give me a couple of days and I'm going to be fine. So he still didn't get it. And it was very difficult telling him over and over, but things have changed now because he didn't appreciate the changes. He still doesn't. And if respite taught him one thing, it's how much I do. And he does appreciate what I do. It must be really hard doing this for someone who doesn't show their appreciation. And Tom makes sure that he does. He says thank you a lot, and I make him say please for things, and it's like having a grandson, not a husband. But it sounds silly to say manners are important, but to say thank you and to say, I know you're tired, but could you? And there are heavy sighs from my direction. I've just sat in this chair. You couldn't have asked me a moment ago. But I don't think he stops to look at the whole picture, and I think that's a good thing. I think if he worried more about being a burden, that's a horrible word. He's my husband, he's not my burden. But there are times when he feels very worthless and like a burden, and I'm very keen that he doesn't feel that. I'd hate it if somebody did that to me. So you have to put aside resentment and choose. I choose to try and be nicer about it. When you're woken in the night, that you bite your lip, you don't say, oh, not again. So that's the choice I make all the time, I think. And I don't always manage it. I have grumpy. Well, grumpy is our byword. It covers a lot more than grumpy, but it's the polite word we use.